All right, I will call the Community Center Exploration Committee meeting to order. It is Wednesday, March 29th. It is 7:05 p.m. First item of business is to approve the meeting minutes from last meeting. Susan circulated a draft. Are there any comments? I thought they were well done.
I think they look great.
Yeah.
I agree. Any other comments? You see, we told you'd master it. Susan.
Well, and then I'll just add that thank you very much to Jen for volunteering to do them this evening. Now that I got the hang of it, I'm gonna pass that on for tonight. Thank you.
Just so I know, who's our phone number that's dialed in? I just want to make sure it's not a family member or
it's Nikki. Can you guys hear me?
There you go. All right, perfect. I'm just going to change your name so we don't have to show your phone number.
Okay, thank you.
All right. All right. So I will make a motion to approve the meeting minutes as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Roll call vote. Susan?
Yes.
Jen?
Yes.
Janet?
Yes.
Tim? Bling?
I'm going to abstain. I didn't get a chance to look at it.
Okay. Nikki?
Yes.
And I am a yes. So that is a 5-0-1 vote, if I got my math right. Next is NERI Building Committee update. So obviously, the work of that committee directly impacts, I think, some of where we all go. And there's been what I'll call material, substantive, whatever big word you want to use, updates since our last meeting. So I figured I'd take a pause and kind of make sure everyone's on the same page, much like this agreed to do at the last meeting, and we'll get to it when on our next agenda topic on the notice to the community. We will be sending the following details out in a joint letter from the NERI Building Committee, Superintendent of School, Town Administrator, and Chair of the Select Board in the coming days. It just probably will come out after your letter, Janet, and we'll talk about your letter in a second.
Okay.
So we expect, at last meeting I told you the NERI building would be brought in the June MSBA board meeting, I think is where we left off, if I've got my meeting straight. We've now learned and been asked to submit documentation this week with the expectation we're now in the April board meeting. So it's been moved up 2 months. The expectation is that NERI will be welcomed into the feasibility study phase, which is where you'd actually start to hire project managers and designers to really figure out where we're going with that building, facility, property, et cetera. They are entertaining 3 options as part of that process. Option 1 would be to keep it a grade 4 and 5 school. Option 2 would be to make it grades 3, 4, and 5. And option 3 would be to make it grades 2, 3, 4, and 5. Those are the options that they're potentially considering. And obviously, 2 out of those 3 options would likely result in the potential decommission of a school. The new fact is superintendent, myself from the NERI Building Committee, and town administrator had a meeting with the MSBA last week when they informed us we were moving forward to introduce Finn into the equation instead of just Woodward. And they have allowed us to study that option as well. It was actually encouraged, is what I would say, is if we are going to potentially decommission, because the age of the Finn school is naturally, even though it's had additions, renovations, et cetera, it shows up to them as a 1960 school, as opposed to the Woodward school, which the circa 2000 school, because that was a complete rebuild. So a lot is going to happen there pretty quickly. There will be no special town meetings anywhere in the near term for any sort of sizable funding. It's going to take a while to go through the procurement process to hire a project manager, hire a designer. All that money has already been approved from last year's town meeting, so it's not any sort of funding that needs to be obtained, but it's moving a lot quicker than we were 3 weeks ago when we all met. And I think my job is obviously to keep everyone informed as that moves forward, but figured I'd pause and see if there's any questions. All of that will come out in a formal letter. It even kind of came up at town meeting last week, incidentally, in conjunction with the Algonquin project. But that's where we're at. So I'll pause and see if there's any questions.
One of the things we had briefly touched on last meeting and also when we toured Woodward was potentially moving fifth grade into Trottier. Is that not a possibility at this point, or just not necessarily part of the consideration of moving grades into Neary, but not necessarily out of Neary?
I don't want to fully discount it. It's been educationally advised against, but I think a lot's going to as you start to develop the plan for what the school could or should look like, and whether you're doing a renovate or a complete gut and start from scratch. Like, we have to study all the options. That's one of the requirements of the MSBA. That certainly could come back on the table. Let's just say adding 1 grade to a school
Sure.
just causes the financial number to grow from tolerable for most citizens to intolerable. I think, that would certainly come back, but I don't think that that's actively being studied. But I certainly will take it back to the superintendent as part of the other committee, just to make sure he knows that people are still asking that question.
Yeah, because I just found out, like, friends of mine in Stoneham, fifth graders are in their middle school. And so I didn't realize that was still very common in Massachusetts to have fifth grade middle school.
Yeah, go ahead, Tim.
Are the 40B projects or the potential inclusion of those extra housing as part of the plans that are with the Neary school committee? So if there would be 2 of those facilities in town, and how many students they would actually bring or potentially bring, affecting capacity, is that part of this study?
That's already done, right? So one of the things that was signed last week by the select board is what they call an enrollment certification. So they've studied various scenarios using birth rates, community migration, consideration of potential projects, but they really don't consider a project potential until it's permitted. So both, I think, of what you're talking about are not permitted yet. However, based on the district's analysis, we believe the enrollment that the MSBA and the town have agreed to has about a 15% cushion above what we think actually would happen if no developments occur. So there is certainly cushion, and obviously if something got permitted during the process, and the MSBA specifically asked us about MBTA communities, given that we are one, in that new zoning initiative, I think there will certainly be further discussions, but they don't do what ifs. But they did ask that very specific question. So it's at least documented as a potential as we move forward, but it wouldn't be part of the planning until we get further along. But there is also a cushion built in.
Okay, so those 2 properties, if they would be fully occupied, or something like 300 units. So 300 units with families and whatnot, you think that 15% we could accommodate and actually reasonably accommodate that amount of influx if there's families in those?
You have no idea what they're going to build, right? Is it really 300? Are they multifamily? Are they being used by, does anyone become 55 and older, which obviously would not create any school population? I think there's just a lot of question marks. So I don't think I could accurately answer your question, but I do know they're on notice about both projects that have been discussed pretty extensively, I think, at this point.
Okay.
And at least we're not uncommon. Most communities are MBTA communities. So this is new. I think it's new territory for all of them. I realize one has been around for a long time. One is, I guess, newer.
Does the NERI feasibility committee have a preference for what happens, or are you guys just still looking at all the possibilities?
We're required to look at the possibilities. I think it's gonna come down to dollars, Ryan. I think there's certainly a preference on what's the most educationally sound way to proceed long-term, but can the community stomach the cost of that? And it doesn't make sense is gonna be a whole other ballgame, which is why I think this committee's work is so important, because in an ideal world, anything we decide to do, whether it's presented in the same warrant or not, at least is out there for the community to consider. That's what we did with public safety, right? Like advisory stood up there at the time and said, you not only can afford the public safety building, but you're not impacting your ability to do future capital projects, whether it be a community center, senior center, library, and or school renovations, right? They didn't obviously pick one, but they basically, I think, Janet, you were on advisory at that time.
Yeah.
And I think that's I think what we're going to need to be able to say is what projects are we impacting if we do 1 or 2 or 3, and what does that mean, longer term for the taxpayers?
What is the SBA reimbursement rate? Is it like 40%?
It's a little less than 40. It changes each year based on a series of factors, mainly economic, wealth of the community compared to others. That's the main factor. We have one of the lowest reimbursement rates in the state.
So if the school would be multiple extra grades, like let's just say, since we are looking at Woodward coming offline as part of our charter,
Or Finn, I think we're gonna have to get our charge updated now.
yeah, or Finn, one of the schools coming offline, it almost doubles the school project cost because it's going to accommodate extra grades that weren't previously there. So that project could be double the cost, like $60 million cost versus 30 to do a school. And then 40% of that would be reimbursed theoretically. And then we would
Tim, I think it's really dangerous to throw numbers out. Incredibly dangerous. So what I would say is, to your theory of doubling the cost, a gym is going to be a gym in a building, whether it's 2 grade, right? You may make a slightly larger gym, but there's going to, right? Same with like an auditorium. An auditorium is probably going to be beyond the school use. So I think there's going to be some items that are like sunk costs that you have to have the space regardless of how many kids you have in the school. And then, yeah, every grade you add, every classroom you add is a cost. I will say the one factual number we're aware of is that when we were looking at this last year, just as a preliminary topic, it was about 125 square feet per student that occupies a building. Just to give you a rough average. And that's for like all space. So it's 125 square feet per person.
Jason, is that in Southborough?
That's just their general building standards. That's how they design, I guess.
Okay, because I think that would differ if you had 4 grades versus 3 grades, and
I agree, and I also think
there are economies of scale here and there.
And I think the other thing we just need to all keep in mind is our schools have capacity now, regardless of which one you want to talk about. So you may not be building the same size facility for the grades that are there now. Like, for example, NERI has 7 classrooms that are used for administration, and we actually make lease and rent payments on that from Northborough. But theoretically, you could put another grade in NERI tomorrow if the administration had somewhere to go. I wouldn't do that based on the condition of the school, but that's a totally different discussion. But Tim, I don't want to, I think any number is going to be a large number, and I can easily say it would be the largest capital project this town has taken on, and it would dwarf anything that the public safety building was.
Okay, so my question to it, as I think part of consideration of, and it's not necessarily in our charter for us to consider this, but as a taxpayer on the committee, it's something I consider. if the school wouldn't be as big, because we already have functional school buildings, there could be a good chunk of money that would be theoretically in the bigger project cost of what a one larger school could be. That could then go towards some of these other initiatives like rec and other departments that could use funding from the tax base. So from some of my thought process as I think about some of these options that we're going to be pursuing and looking at and comparing, we'll ultimately compare the bigger cost of a bigger school versus a smaller school, keeping the current schools and then adding a more robust other project that would then be funded at the same number as one bigger school. Because MSBA is only reimbursing a percent of this.
Right, versus any other project we do is going to have zero reimbursement.
Exactly.
No, that's incredibly fair. I think that goes into our scenario planning that we do as we move forward. All right, I'm moving on from Neary unless someone stops me.
I just have a process question, Jason, which you might
Sure.
not even be able to answer, but I think it would be helpful for me and probably everybody else to know, is that I'm assuming at some point, whatever decisions are kind of being evaluated have to go before the school committee. So what do we end up talking with them? Is that like a separate presentation? Or does this stuff need to, because right, don't they, how are they involved in the process, I guess, is my question.
So school building committees, and this is my first one I've been on, basically have pretty much all, that would be the sponsoring entity that brings it to town meeting floor. I would encourage us to do it with the select board and the school committee, like as one unified joint motion, but it has representation from the select board and the school committee already. Plus, there's requirements from the state to be an MSBA project of all sorts of expertise that we had. The state had to sign off on our building committee, like in the expertise. So here's how I envision it. And as long as I'm a member of the committee, I can make sure it happens, is it's going to be an incredibly public process. They have public meetings just like us. At some point, the committees are going to have to come together and say, all right, here are our options for Neary. Here's where we're leaning. At the same time, I think this group will have what our options are. I'm going to have to put it on a piece of paper. And we're going to have to see, well, something may be really great. The puzzle doesn't fit together. That's going to be the complicated part. That's why we, as a committee, need to obviously move down a few paths, leave the consideration that we may have a school available to us, but we also have to assume they just build a grade 4 and 5 school and it's just, we continue as is. It is certainly a potential outcome. So I think that will go into what scenarios we play. So I hope I answered your question, Ryan. But it's very,
yeah, I think it sounds like it would be building towards a, like when the architect presented the ideas, it seemed like there was a multi-joint meeting of like so many different, but like maybe not that massive, but it does seem like eventually the groups would have to come together and then come to at least like get whatever the prevailing idea is, right, forward, so that decisions could be made. So that it does help, Jason. I think looking at like what the result of the work would be is helpful for everyone, including myself.
I completely agree. It's going to be quite the puzzle to put together at some point. I have no idea how we're going to put it together, but we'll figure it out as we go. Okay. Next is under chair and members update is the letter. So Janet, do you just want to briefly talk about where you're at and what you're planning to do? And thank you again for taking on this task.
I kind of thought it was the Jason and Janet letter, but that's all right. We've been back and forth a few times with it. And I got it to, it was just, just asking for input, saying, to people that we felt, you don't want to read the letter at this
Well, I
point.
think if you've sent it into, or whenever you send it in, you should just forward it to the committee as an FYI.
Okay. It was basically a thing saying, no one committee can represent all ideas and priorities of an entire town. And, please feel free to come up with your ideas, think out of the box, represent formal or informal groups that you're part of, and, let us know your thoughts. And I introduced who was on the committee, what the charge was, and I think we were pretty comfortable with it, but then Jason said that some of the things that he was going to bring up tonight needed to be included in it. So that's where we are. You want to?
And I guess Janet would be using the word Finn in addition to Woodward, I think would be the only thing I would add.
Oh, okay.
Or that concept, and we can figure out that, but I think that we're gonna have to ask the select board, and not that I think it should slow us down from adding that into our consideration, but I think the select board should amend our charge once again to consider Finn and stuff like that.
So as long as I add that in, is there anybody else we should swing this by before heading for general distribution?
Does anyone here want to see it again? I know they kind of delegated to Janet already, so.
Okay. And you don't want to send it to the select board, or?
You can certainly send it when you send it to my South Pro. I mean, they're going to see it.
Oh, okay.
So.
Okay. So then for distribution, it would be my Southborough. How else can we do this?
Probably send it to Vanessa Hale and have her put it on
to
the town
department heads.
website.
Oh, okay.
Or like through Katie Berry. And then I look at Ryan, Pam, Tim, each of you have your own distribution list. If
Yeah.
you want to do something with it, you'll have it. But really defer to each of you and your user groups. I know Pam is probably more of a, lots of people in the building, and just starting the discussion about it again and sensitizing people to what we are talking about at this point. And I know Bill is a great steward of that as well.
Yeah, I think the wider the distribution, the better. And the only one whose email's on there is Jason's. But since everyone's name is on it, again, informally, you may get information from people. And I don't know how we want to compile that. I guess it just changes your thinking, or as we discuss things, you could bring up what you've heard. I don't know whether you want to make it any more formal than that, Jason.
I think we just need to get the pulse of where the community's at.
Yep.
Right. And I think once we get the pulse, that'll inform some of what we do, I'm sure. May not be everything. I also I'm thinking through your question on distribution, Janet. And when Neary Building sends out their letter, my guess is Greg's going to put that in his weekly communication to the entire school community. Okay. So I'll have him link in this letter if he's comfortable doing that. Okay. So then you'll get the whole school community as well if you miss it through any of these other channels.
So you'll take care of doing that part? Yes.
Once it's out there, yeah.
Okay.
Does it matter if it goes to Northborough or not? Or would we want to do just the 4 schools in Southborough? And does it matter if it goes to Northborough? Just because the superintendent's letter goes to both towns.
I'll let him, because they have the school ones too, right? So each individual school sends one out. Yeah. Then he has his. But like if you think about like other projects, they sometimes, for example, the Neary project, when we originally went for funding, was in both towns.
Oh, okay.
So I'll let him use his judgment on how to deal with that.
Okay. Okay, so I'll take care of my Southborough, Vanessa Hale, Katie Berry, and I'll send it to the committee, and Jason, you'll take care of the schools.
You got it.
Got it, okay.
Once, if Vanessa can put it up on the town website, we'd be happy to link back to it on social media and in library communications. It might be, I always say this, Jason, it might be mixed in with something else, like events that were coming up, but we do have a fair amount of people who read our newsletter. So I think that would definitely help get the word out.
Yeah, definitely. Same with Rec Commission, same with, yeah. Great, thank you.
All right, thank you for taking the initiative on that, Janet. Tim, is there anything on public-private partnership anything new? I know you gave an update last time. I didn't know whether you wanted this still on the agenda or where you're at or how you want to handle this moving forward.
I have no more update on it specifically. I think that we should try to organize a tour though, if that's the type of thing that we think we would like to learn more about in person. If that's a good use of everybody's time, then we should try to organize a tour there. And I'm gonna have to go back to Kathy Cook and try to get her contact about organizing that. So that's really the only next step in terms of that particular piece that we still have to talk about.
And was that for Wellesley?
That would be the Wellesley location.
And that's more recreation focused. It isn't necessarily senior center in any way, shape, or form.
Correct.
Have Jen, you or Tim been in this facility before?
I've never been to it, but I think I can speak for Jen where I think we're adamantly against it. The idea of a private public, just because you bring in a private vendor to build a recreational facility that's going to make recreation obsolete as a department to some extent. So I think if we're looking from a recreation side or an opinion from the commission, I think we would be very inclined to write Ms. Cook or just a general statement on that. We would not want to explore this option, as you know, it would be only inviting more competition into town, unnecessary competition, in our opinion. Jen, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, I agree. So I know like over the last couple of years, there's been other things that have come up along like when they're looking for a place for like soccer housing and things like that, that we've had a lot of conversations with outside facilities. But I think the other thing is, and I did a ton of research on the Wellesley one, just online, is that they appear to be like a facility for like sports, but it's not like a rec center, and that like they don't serve like all the needs of the community, right? So one of the things I pinged Tim Davis on the side was like, can we call up the Wellesley rec director and ask their opinions, like what this really means? Because it appears from the outside to be kind of like bringing in a Four Kicks, right? That like, yes, they're in town and they're maybe renting out facilities cheaper to the rec department, but they're not actually replacing the rec department and like what's done there. So I think that's like the big difference. It's more about like, if we wanted to get indoor turf in town, then yeah, maybe that's the way you'd pursue something like that, but it's not, that facility is not actually serving as a rec department for Wellesley.
So what are people's views on a tour or not?
Well, we've all been to Four Kicks.
Is it anything different than that? Like just in terms of general concept? I realize the operation may be different, but is that?
This is Nikki. Just from looking online, I think it is a combination of Four Kicks and New England Sports Center. And what's the other one out by Walmart? I forget the name of it. Anyway, it seems to me like those are for-profit sports complexes that serve to, their customers are travel teams and club teams and sometimes adult rec teams, right? But to me, they don't seem at all like community centers and don't seem to have anything for seniors at all. So I'm happy to go over and look at it because it looks like a cool building. But I think we already have a lot of sports complexes in Metro West that maybe Wellesley didn't have. So I don't know if there's even the market for a public-private partnership around here.
All right. Just a suggestion, just trying to figure out how we go forward on this. Tim, I think it's worth you going back to Kathy and Sam. They're the ones that put this into the charge.
Yeah.
And either seeing if they want to come to a meeting and talk to us more about what their vision was with that. And I think it's important maybe to show them in and around 30 minutes into this meeting, Tim and Jen's exchange on like some of their views from a recreation perspective. and obviously realizing that we also have our library in COA colleagues here, right? That it doesn't appear like any of this is geared towards those two constituencies, which obviously we're trying to come up, we're a community of over 10,000 residents, not obviously. So just trying to maybe gauge where, like, how passionate they are that needs to continue to be analyzed, or just kind of give some initial reaction. And then that may inform whether, one of us goes and tours the facility just to make sure we've dotted our I's and crossed our T's, or more than one of us needs to go. Is everyone okay with that process?
I have a thought. I'm assuming that what they're talking about in pursuing that would be alternate funding, some other source of funds for recreation or for any of these endeavors. I've gotten a couple of hints from looking at who's running for what in this election, among other things. So that might be just a thought when you're talking to them, to say, is that really what you're looking for?
That was what it was.
Funding.
That was what it was when I had my initial conversation with them, was opportunities to help bring in a business for alternate funding that would be able to provide services beyond the scope of something that the town would fund themselves, and there'd be extra benefit for it. So that was clear that was part of why it was there in the charter to begin with, from that initial conversation. But as for what those services would be, they would only be like on the surface today, it looks like they're, what Nikki said, only adult type traveling sports type things, not so much the full rec focus. So I'll go back and I'll ask about the rest of it, try to get some better answers, as Jason put it, and go from there. I did send another example of a private-public partnership, and I don't know how it breaks down exactly, but I just sent everybody the email link to check out another one that I saw recently of a big sports complex. It's going to be an indoor cycling center plus a bunch of other things in my hometown area. So it was something that I found interesting, and they explicitly mentioned public-private partnerships in the article. So it was just something interesting to check out as a comparison.
Anything else on that? Otherwise, Tim, I'll keep this on the agenda for whenever we meet next.
Yep.
Okay. So everyone had some homework. This is item 5 on our agenda. I think we've already started to kind of hint around at this a little bit, but really just thinking about, we heard some reaction, or I think a lot of reaction to the plans that already exist, right? And they were very early on. Of potential reuse of Woodward. That was the only building thrown into the mix last year in terms of scenarios outside of the existing town infrastructure and the townhouse, the library, etc. We obviously know what the space needs are of the departments. I'm sure each department, especially the larger ones that are represented here, may want to tweak some things, and we can figure out how we do that. But I think what we agreed to come back with tonight, and I realize I've introduced a complete wild card with Finn, is to talk about potential scenarios that we wanted to have the design team start to flush out some more, but also help us put some costing behind it. Really gonna be really high level costing, obviously, until you have a design, but if Ryan and Janet were gonna go build a new 20,000 square foot library, right? What's the approximate cost of that versus they're going to add 4,000 square feet onto their building in the same site, or if you're going to reposition to another building, et cetera. And the same is true for everyone else. Ryan was looking straight center on me from the example on that. So I don't know if anyone wants to lead with scenarios, or we want to talk about how we deal with Finn before we go into the scenarios that you maybe were thinking about coming into this. I welcome input.
I'd like to hear a little more about Finn, since it hasn't been discussed. I'm also really curious about Trotter. If it is 50% underutilized, I mean, that just seems like you could make another school out of the other half. Call it whatever you want to call it. Call it Neary. You know,
The one thing I'll caution on that is the enrollment has ticked up a little bit. So even though those grades are in the elementary now, so it won't be 50 long term. It just, we're at a complete low point there.
what
But,
is what are the numbers on the lower grades?
Grades, without me pulling up like a whole complicated spreadsheet, off the top of my head, what the select board certified was just over 600 students between grades 2 through 5. It's about, on average, each grade is somewhere between 100 and 140 kids.
Well, that's a big spread.
It's a huge spread, and I can't, but it's every other year. So, for example, this year's kindergarten class is massive, right? Some of that's, a little bit of that's due to COVID. Next year's is projected to be 40 kids or greater lower based on current enrollment. I can't explain it. I have a kid in each of one of those grades. I can't explain it. And then I have a child in second grade. That's a really small grade. I know Janet has a third grader. That grade is massive. So
When you
that
say
adds
massive, it's like 140.
140, 150.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's even higher. Yeah.
Well, when my kids were in these schools and these schools were being built, it was 185. So
Well, that's what we built these schools for. So that's a good indication of why we have the capacity we do.
And fifth grade's small again. So I don't know if it's even, I was surprised when you said every other, because fifth grade is just over 100, I think.
Yeah. So you see it every year that goes. And obviously with the transitions between the schools, like you've got teachers moving schools each year to accommodate. They don't just go and add a new teacher because obviously their budget would be crazy. So Gina, what can we answer about Finn? Just like what the thought is there, or
well, when you say Finn, are we thinking of it like Woodward, like that's a potential for having another use?
yes. So
It would have to be rebuilt, right?
no.
You could renovate Finn. I'm sorry, not Finn. I was thinking Neary. Neary can't be renovated.
Neary
Okay,
can't
so
be renovated.
Finn
So-
put to a completely different use. Department.
Right. So I'll just throw a few things out. It's a 1-story structure.
Yep.
You've got accessibility on multiple ends of the building. And the building is not linear like Woodward is, right? So Woodward, you go from one end to another in a straight line, and you go with the grade, which is the huge issue, obviously, for a lot of the groups here. Finn is flat, has multiple entrances.
What's the square footage?
It's close to 70,000 square feet. So Finn, Woodward, and Neary are all within what I'll call spitting distance of each other in terms of square footage, which is why this is even possible. Most towns have schools that are like large, then small, or something in between. All of like you could repurpose Woodward, for example, as K in 1, and then that would make Finn available in one of these scenarios. So I don't think you need to think about the grade configurations. I think our job as a committee is to think about, if someone handed us Finn, what could we use it for? And my recommendation would be we do the same exact thing we did last year with Woodward, is each group needs to form an opinion about how usable it is for them. Obviously, there's still a gym, there's a kitchen, it's choppier, right? So there's no flow to the building, which actually I think yields potential benefit for groups segregating themselves into whatever they need to do, right? Whether it be, obviously the gym is like completely out on its own, but then you could find other programming spaces. One example, I don't know what the library's view, I don't know what COA's view is, but I do think a lot of your accessibility issues we talked about would be greatly mitigated in that, especially when you think about like the flow of how you could put walls in, take walls down, etc. You're not going to have a lot of load bearing walls because you don't have that second story either.
Mhm.
Go ahead. Tim.
Is there any way to take a look at that?
We can take a
Like
tour.
that.
Do Do you have a floor plan you could send out?
Those are like super secret things for
Yeah.
obvious reasons.
Well,
Safety.
Yeah, I've already, Keith Lavoy, the assistant superintendent, and Greg are fully expecting that coming out of this meeting, we're gonna request a tour. I guess my question for the group is, I know a few of you went to Woodward. I assume we're gonna probably wanna, the group is gonna want, I think we have a bigger group for Finn. Given that most of the people that didn't come to Woodward had already been through it 200 times. So is there a preference on like time of day, et cetera, that works?
That 7 o'clock where I thought worked well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Second that.
Recreation is already in there at 7 o'clock on Wednesday, so if we just want to tail onto that. We
is that
know,
when you have your meetings or something else?
no, we have programming in the gym, so
Perfect.
we know staff will be there, so.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the other day they just had the custodian candidly let us in and we did what we needed to do. So I will look to find a good weeknight. I will say if someone can't do a weeknight and needs other accommodations, they are very accommodating. So just shoot me a message on the side and we'll make sure everyone gets through there just to form an opinion. And I think each group's probably going to need to form some preliminary views, which I realize may require committee or commission meetings of like, hey, yeah, we're interested in exploring this, or yeah, don't waste your time or money because there's this gating issue that we just can't get over.
Is the gym and cafeteria isolated on one part of the building? Or is it in the middle or something?
Nope, off to the far right-hand side towards
Yeah.
Parkerville.
Against the fields,
Yeah.
Okay, that little shut off, or is it like the back of the U?
Closest to Parkerville Road.
Did you ever vote that? You never voted there?
Nope. I am not from Southborough. I've only been in town for about 4 years, so all of this stuff is all new. For me anyway.
There's also a lunchroom and a separate like auditorium that at one point was the gym. So there's some interesting spaces there.
I call that,
Would
so.
would recreation have access to the fields at the school as well?
Those aren't school fields, those are recreation fields.
Okay,
Those are already town fields.
okay. But it would be, you'd have an office next to the fields potentially as part of that if Finn was a option.
Yep.
And you don't have fields next to your offices now, right?
Or gym next to your office now.
What'd you say?
And you don't have a gym next to your office now.
what about parking spaces? Is there room for more parking down there?
That was my question too, Bill. Do we know the parking capacity at Finn? I don't
Well-
know that off the top of my head.
We'll have to find it. And I think that's what I think, if we decide to study it as a committee, which I'm not sure we're going to have much of an option. I think we need to, unless someone really disagrees there. There's that we can get the existing count. But the interesting thing, and this will make more sense on the tour, or unless I feel like Tim's got the Google map up and is looking around. The back of the building, there's actually parking right now, but it's blocked off during the school day because that's also where the kids have recess. That's a completely, that would allow for some creativity in the back. The septic is out in the fields. So you also, you do have the ability, I think, to add some impervious surface if you needed to, but the flow, like you can actually almost go, like you can't do it now, but like you would have the ability to have a flow and a new traffic system there, depending upon where each function went, if that was the path we went down.
It must have at least twice as much as the current senior center parking.
Quick looking, it looks like over 170 spots. And this is just me kind of quickly counting spaces from Google Earth. So don't hold me to that number, but it looks somewhere around that 150 to 190 range.
Yeah, because there's multiple lots. There's like the long one, and then a chunk, and then in
That's
front.
Well, I don't know how that
Is that going?
I think it might be Pam.
That's including the parking for the fields. So I don't know if that's considered parking for the school or not, but looking at that whole condensed area is where I kind of got to my number.
Staff and parents park down in that lower lot because the other one fills up out front. And you can't go around the back during the school day.
The amount of spots that are in the small lot by the field are probably the amount that's around the building towards the back. So it's, small fraction, but still a good amount.
Presumably, because I know with the Woodward options, Jason, right? So I'm kind of pivoting here in my thinking as to like looking at Finn kind of initially as we looked at Woodward, just in a macro sense, right? But is it fair to say in the assessment, right? Like what we learned from looking at Woodward was that Woodward wouldn't really solve potentially all of the spatial problems for all of the departments, right? So it wouldn't be like if Finn became available, you could presumably have the senior center move there, have a library facility, and have all of recreation's needs met within the same building.
No, we actually did the math on it when we were there, and there's more than enough space in theory, right? Jason, correct me if I'm wrong, but we were crunching all the numbers when we were there because there's 60,000 square feet.
If you took 20,000 each, Ryan, right? And don't right, like just if you take 20,000 each, that's 60,000 square feet. If you just had the three functions, I think the distraction last time was because the town did a space needs study and you had every other department involved, which is kind of like, as we talked about, like kind of off to the side from this analysis, that created a lot of square footage that did make it impossible. So I would say if we're just looking at the three major groups here, it could work, whether it could work space-wise, whether it works functionality-wise, flow-wise, all the other, like that's, I think, the $1 million question.
So do you see this as just a three group facility as opposed to bringing in the town and administrative offices and all that?
Here's what I would suggest. I would never close the door on that now. It's just like, I think we need to focus on the groups we have represented here and get input from the community. I think the input we got from the community loud and clear is, with all due respect to the employees that operate the other space, no one was very interested in that aspect of the project, right? They feel like we could find them space elsewhere if that really is a critical need, but they were interested in the three groups that are represented here, right? And that's where we got the positive comments from, absent like just the functionality. So I would say, if we're going to look at Finn, we look at it with these three groups. If there's leftovers, we have a discussion as long as it's actually working for these three groups, right? Or if it's not working for one group, for whatever reason, we say, what could that space be used for? And how are we going to accomplish that group that needs to kind of not be part of this portion of the project? How are we going to still accomplish their needs? Right. And I think you can think about different permutations of that. But I'm also thinking longer term as I say that is, for example, if the senior center really did move out of Corderville Hall, we would also need to address, should the departments outside of COA still occupy Corderville Hall, or should they relocate somewhere else? And that's like all your permitting departments for the most part at this point in facilities. Go ahead, Tim.
Would Woodward need bathrooms modified for kindergarten and first grade?
I don't know I don't know the exact answer to that, but
would it be an expectation though? Like that's the one thing that Finn has custom to those grades is the proximity of bathrooms to the classroom. So I don't know that answer from any knowledgeable standpoint about if that's a requirement for that style of grade or not, because I don't have kids that are that age, and I don't really know anything about what the requirements are and needs are of that. So that would be my one concern about pursuing or moving forward is without knowing that piece of information.
I think that is something we can ask, but that's probably outside of the scope. I think we need to say, if they're going to give you an option at something, the other, and this would be probably Neary Building Committee, is going to have to run the estimates of what that would be,
Sure.
if it's even necessary. You're right. That was certainly a reason that the initial school research subcommittee, we recommended not spending a lot of time on Finn at that point in time, was because it was working for the grades that it was, designed for. But it is certainly something that would have to be considered. But I think that cost, compared to anything else we're talking here, is hopefully rounding.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't imagine it would be on the table at all if that was a mandatory thing and couldn't be accommodated in another building. I
I think it's some plumbing and opening a few walls is hopefully the extent of it.
I have another question.
Go ahead.
It's a little bit different, but you were researching whether or not, because this question keeps coming up, the library building and land has to be used for a library. Do you know when there might be a time frame on an answer to that?
I asked Mark for an update today. I have not heard back yet. Obviously, town council was busy through last weekend. So they owe us an answer, and I think it's an important one because I'm sure it informs where your board wants to go.
Well, the whole town. I mean, if it
Yeah.
has to be a library, we're not going to just let it sit up empty.
Right, exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Jason,
are
is
still-
there,
Oh,
Oh.
sorry, Nikki, go ahead.
I wanted to find out if there's a way to get an estimate, just for comparison purposes, as we go forward, of what it would cost to keep the library as it is. And I think Ryan has a pretty good estimate of that. To have a standalone senior center estimate, whether it's Corderville or somewhere else, and then use recreation or use Finn for recreation. And I know that it's way too big just for recreation. But I think for comparison purposes, if we're going forward, we'll need to be able to show that to people so we can either say this costs this much, this costs this much, and this costs this much as people are making their decisions.
Completely agree with everything you said. Does anyone have any disagreement with that? And I think that's what we need to kind of put on a piece of paper when I'm hoping we can run through any other scenarios. That way we need to basically we need to understand how much this is going to cost to analyze these, right? And get like some numbers that we can actually feel comfortable with. So I'm hearing from Nikki, and I'm going to paraphrase this a little bit, keeping the library on the existing site, but dealing with any additions or additional space that Ryan, Janet, and the library board are looking for. Senior center standalone based on any of the requirements Pam and Bill and their team have. And then I'm hearing sort of a combination, right? Can all groups look at Finn and what are the options there and how much square footage is left, which I realize the answer to the library deed question factors in maybe some of these other ones, but those appear to be, and Nikki did a great job of this, right? The three scenarios that we could at least start to study, unless someone wants to continue to study anything related to Woodward.
You seem to have beat that one to death.
Part of what our process is going to be after filing the letter of intent for our grant round is in looking at public input that's then going to inform what will eventually be an ask at the next annual town meeting for planning and design for the library. So I don't want to phrase this as sort of an a la carte, but there's going to be different options for different people, for different things that we could do to the library. So like one of the one of the proposals, I think one of the ideas that's floating out there is, could the septic system be relocated? Because there's been a lot of attention that's been kind of raised about, we do our outdoor story times on the septic system, and that isn't ideal, right? And that also isn't topographically great because it's on such an elevated area for ADA and for a number of other items. So like, again, Jason, I never come into these meetings hoping to further complicate the work that everyone here is doing. But, we're going to be kind of looking at the library in a more micro level, as well as doing the macro work on all the departments that we're doing. I do think there's some synergy here in that we can line up some of those objectives, but I'm letting you know, to kind of piggyback off Nikki's comment. I mean, there's going to be different avenues we can explore, and obviously not relocating a septic system is a lot less expensive than relocating it, right, to like under the parking lot, which is one of the options we're looking at. So there's going to be different options, I think, as far as what we could do in an existing library space. In the same way, I think we're going to look at different options for Finn, right, potentially. So
Jason, you're muted.
Muted.
I was going to say, Ryan, I appreciate you bringing that up. And I guess it's really important for you and your board to independently continue to go down whatever paths you need to do to position yourself for the grant cycle. I'm hopeful, though, that at least as part of our process, we'll be able to give some broad brush, like high level, if you used X amount per square foot, and you're definitely going to need in and around, like just to give some idea, because then it'll allow the modeling to continue. You will put as many asterisks as you want of needs to be refined, of whether we're going to move a septic system or stay on this site or go over here. But I think that'll help start to frame some of our path.
I know Susan's had her hand up too. I will say, like, the single story element is really good because one of the price pieces we're looking at long term is an elevator, right? Which as anybody who's looked at pricing for elevators or redoing an elevator or doing a new elevator knows, they are very expensive, is what I'm learning.
Yes. Go ahead, Susan.
So I think you and Nikki both really succinctly said of those three scenarios, but I'm wondering if where the scenario for the rec center being in a standalone facility, because I think we've kind of all determined that what is it, Union South, the building that they're in is not something they're going to be able to stay in permanently. And if library can have a new renovation and senior center could have a new renovation, what are we thinking of as that other option for the rec center? And one of my questions is, I'm just curious, can you move into one of the schools if there's room in one of the schools, or is a standalone building for you an option as well?
Tim or Jen, want to take that? How about, go ahead, Jen.
Jen, you first.
Is there some elephant in the room we don't know about here?
No. I don't know. I don't know if I have thoughts right now.
Can I maybe simplify it for you? How about we look at independent new facilities for all three functions as one of our scenarios?
Yes.
That's a good
Does
idea.
does that help you, Tim?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess like the biggest, I mean, for rec, the biggest thing is like we don't have a footprint that we could do that on. Right? So it'd have to be somewhere else. Versus like library has a footprint, senior center has a footprint to build from. Rec definitely out, so
Yeah.
But remember, we have land in the town's inventory that could support, it wouldn't support a school, wouldn't support a public safety facility, but it could potentially, and I think you already looked at one, behind the transfer station, once upon a time.
Is the space that South Union is on not sufficient at 4 acres to be a functional place? I mean, like, I don't know the limitations of that. I know it's kind of a weird elevation difference when I went there. But would that not support like a knockdown and rebuild on the same site? I know we'd have to go through a certain level of historical and other red tape to make something like that happen. But what's the backstory here that I don't know?
I mean, I think that's a big piece of it, the historical piece of it. We have massive restrictions on what we can do with that building. I mean, just in general on the footprint, if we're looking to achieve what we want, specifically a gym, I mean, and the elevations and taking into account the amount of parking just based on that one piece of the facility, I don't think it would be possible in any sense.
Parking by itself, I mean.
Yeah, it's bad as it is with what we have. So
it fills up. I mean, if they're doing one event and then they're also sharing the parking spots with another department currently, right? So I know some of the programs are in the evening when those staff have left. And I think in a way that's somewhat helpful because you wouldn't have enough cars. I know people for recreation programs in the evening carpool because they're worried they won't get a space.
Don't they use St. Matthew's parking? Isn't that kind of or do they not like that?
a little bit of both. So, I mean, if the horseshoe fills up, then yeah, they spill out down onto their parking. So
St. Matthews doesn't mind that, do they?
well, we let them use our parking too, so it's kind of
And the upper lot is horrible to get in and out of that hairpin turn. And it's very residential there too. It's yeah, I feel like it's just not an ideal spot.
At least then you don't have to climb, 4 flights of stairs to get to the front door.
So where is an ideal spot? So Tim and Jen, what's your dream? Yes, you want a gym, obviously, but what's your ideal scenario with space constraints that we know? Like you probably can't build your own whole new building. What's your best scenario?
like, what do you mean? Like if we were to have all the land in the world type thing and we wanted to do what we wanted to do, or?
If you have all the land that exists in Southborough right now, what would you want to do?
No, I mean, I guess I just think, generally to that one site that we've talked about, I mean, the gymnasium is key. I think that helps us programming, but I also think that helps the youth groups in town. I think it alleviates some burden from them. So full-size gym, ideally like a Finn or a Trottier, and then just expanded programming space. Ideally, I would love something outdoor as well, a playground or another open green space or a feature of some sort. But something that again, I don't want to put numbers and sizes and stuff on, but something that can alleviate our reliance on the schools. So we're from the 10 to 15 programs we do each week, to be able to bring that in-house so that we can work on our own clock with our own staff for our own benefit and not be kind of piecemealing everything together. So
can you be in a school? Like, is there a reason why you can't be, and this might be a naive question, but why you can't go in Trottier and some of that empty space and use their gym and their fields? Would you have to pay for that? I'm not really sure how that works.
I mean, if we follow the model now, I mean, we have restrictions on time. School gets priority up till 6 o'clock. So it's not like we'd have freedom to roam kind of and use the spaces that we would want to. And then it being a school building, unless something changed, I'm assuming we would be constrained by the union contracts of, space and what we can use.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So at first pass, Finn sounds good.
Yeah, I mean, if I had to choose between the two, forget Woodward, I would take Finn in a second. So,
So
You
it's-
might not have all the land in Southborough, Tim, just because the library land might be part of the deed. We're checking.
You can't build on the golf course either. We did that.
So when you talk about the union contracts, those are school
schools, yeah,
building
custodial,
contracts.
Yeah.
So if Finn was no longer a school building, you could do whatever. Okay.
Right.
In that particular.
right.
Go ahead, Tim. You've been waiting.
I mean, I'm still looking at Google Maps finally found the actual South Union building and looking at the parcel of land that surrounds. It seems like the parcel of land goes all the way down to actual Highland Street. I know there's elevation on that property of where it gets raised up, and I think a piece of this, for why it doesn't make sense, is you need flatter land for fields and whatnot around the building to be fully useful. But let's just say that building doesn't exist anymore and it tragically burnt down and you don't have to worry about it. Now, like, would that property at 4 acres, is 4 acres a good size of land to be able to do something on? Or is that size of land not sufficient? Like, I don't know about parking lot.
And I don't think it's gonna be an option for us. The town, it doesn't matter what, I don't think what happens from an election perspective or anything like that. The town formed multiple subcommittees to look at affordable housing there. That was how this group came together originally, from a capital planning, then the formation of the subcommittee, is because of the parcel, and there was a lot of research done on the parcel. It was not ideal to accommodate anyone's needs moving forward, and there just appeared to be better options with the other infrastructure we've already talked about. Now, that could certainly change, but I'm just saying they've already put out the bid once. There's a presentation forthcoming to the select board from Shopsy on making that property affordable. It's obviously very close to the MBTA station. They're going to have to figure out how they're dealing with this MBTA zoning, which it appears the town doesn't have a choice to deal with based on some latest comments by the Attorney General. So my personal view is we'd be wasting our time looking at that site, because I think the town's already moved on from the site. And my understanding is they've also received bids from third parties independently looking to do something with it. So take that for what you may, but that's where I think that one's at.
Okay.
I don't know, does anyone want to try to re-engineer that one or push back on that one?
I can
think-
just, go ahead, Tim.
No, I was gonna say, I think too, you think of where it is, and I just don't think it would be welcomed by the neighborhood. And also just access wise, I mean, that would be tight to have a sizable building right there too. So I just think there'd be more things working against it than for it. So,
When looking at potential sites for a new library, that parcel was something that we did. I haven't discussed it with the board, but I looked at different properties that were available or that could be renovated or could be available in the future. And I think the fact that it is so ingrained in the residential neighborhood was going to make traffic flow, especially at the volume that exists at the library, extremely problematic. So it was kind of ruled out as a potential option. I mean, I'd be happy to reevaluate that with the board, but I think the initial assessment would probably stand. It wouldn't work as a library site.
Okay, I'm okay with it. I mean, just looking at the map and only being there once, I can see why some of these opinions came about, but I can also see the piece of land that is there looks a lot larger than what the footprint of the space and the roads are today. So the idea for reimagining what that could turn into is there. but there's a lot against it, and I think that there's been a lot of negativity about what it's going to cost going forward. So even though it's probably boiler and windows and roof, it's not excessively expensive. There's still money to be spent on the building, and that's just part of it.
There was a small contingent in town not that long ago that I think was interested in looking at potentially as an art center again, which is what it was a long time ago. I think there were, I don't think that's in the cards in the future, but I know that that was something that some of the people who were involved in the building way back wanted that under consideration as well. So there's been a lot of ideas that have floated around about the building. I just, it is on a chunk of property, but it's like kind of on a hill. And as somebody who manages a municipal building kind of on a hill, there's a lot of, there would be a lot that would have to be done to the landscape and the topography there to make it work and functional.
Anything else on that one? All right, so I have written down new facility times 3, right? Looking at each of those independently in a silo. We can make assumptions on location. I think at least 2 out of the 3 facilities already have a site. One would have to be to be determined. Maybe we use the transfer station. Behind the transfer station and Middle Road is the potential option for that. Obviously, the architect designers have to come in and talk with each of the departments again and all of that. I have Finn just basically seeing what we can do with that for 3 groups here. And then if there's excess, we'll talk about that at a later point. Do we want to, I guess, Mike, for Bill and Pam, you had thrown out in the last meeting, Quarterville, right? If you had that to yourselves, what it could mean, but I would assume that would mean extensive renovation to make it fully ADA compliant. Because right, there's spaces in the building that you can't really have accessible to the public based on the current accessibility, right? So
You need an elevator, and as everybody says, elevators are very expensive.
so to me, go ahead, Pam, sorry.
And you'd have to, I mean, yeah, you'd have to do extensive work. When we looked at it before with the architects and, you know, what we were going to do with that property, it was less expensive and more practical to basically build a new building with like prevailing wage and all of these other things to get that to where we want it to be. That architect and that committee determined on that site that it would be more practical to start from scratch and build up. I mean, that's not necessarily carved in stone, but I guess if we were looking at our scenario, it would be 2 different scenarios. Would be, you know, a brand new standalone building, or maybe not full renovation of that building, but maybe what an architect would see as an acceptable renovation that wasn't, you know, out of sight financially. So I think there's like 2 scenarios on our site that probably should be considered. I don't know which one would be less expensive at this point.
Okay.
Yeah, the 206 committee, when we decided to do a senior center back then, determined that it was a lot less expensive to start over again than to try and renovate that building, just because it's 2 or 3 separate buildings all joined together, and the infrastructure of the original house is really in tough shape. So it makes sense to level it and start right in the first place, I think.
Yeah, and I don't know if we want to reinvent that wheel, since that committee and the architects already kind of determined that.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, depends on what you're looking at. If you're looking at, you know, the perfect, you know, senior center, brand new, or are we looking at something that's not, I mean, do we want to explore the possibility of, you know, doing a partial renovation or that kind of thing for this purpose? I'm not sure.
But that's kind of the Band-Aid approach.
It is,
I think-
yeah.
I think the architect should probably have a pretty easy read on that, and be able to guide us
Right.
down that path, which path to go down.
Yep.
I guess Janet and Ryan, from a library perspective, we talked about new, right? I know you're gonna be doing all your other things, getting ready for the Mass Library Board. Is there any other scenarios you want to throw in there, i.e. renovation, like expansion now? Or how do you want to approach library needs at this point?
Well, I think this
Oh.
committee has to have as one of their items expansion, because we're actively pursuing that. So we don't want this committee to come out with a report that doesn't include what we end up doing at the library. So from that standpoint.
Okay, so library would be new and expansion.
Yeah, because we have to look at 2 scenarios, a minimum of 2, in order to qualify for the grant funding. So we would, I mean, I guess we're interested in the conversations continuing, because I don't have to file the grant till May of next year, right, Jason? So I would, if a school is a possibility, if it's one of the scenarios, and that kind of like, it seems like Finn is becoming a very real possibility, right? So I think Janet and I would be interested in touring the facility with everybody else, because we've never really looked at it. I've been in Finn before, I'm sure Janet has as well, but I don't think we've looked at it in the lens that we're going to be looking at now, which is to kind of see the possibility there. But we are actively going to be pursuing expanding the current site. And I would say, you know, not to tell you where things are going to land in the future, but it's something like 80 to 85%, if not more, of the libraries as part of the grant process renovate their existing sites. It's very uncommon for libraries to build entirely new or to go into any sort of shared situation. That is even less likely than a new facility. So I mean, I have a feeling based on how things have gone with other communities, how things would go with us, but you can never predict Southborough, right? So I think we're open to the possibilities, but that's just kind of where we're at. I know you want to talk about next steps and action items for the next meeting. The question I kind of have for you, because I'm talking too much already, is just what do you want us to bring back to the library trustees? Like as far as decisions to make or things that would help for the next meeting, because Janet and I would be happy to do that at this point. And I think there might be takeaways, right? Like,
I'm going to throw out a few ideas, and people can either dismiss them or add on to them. My first thing is this group needs to tour Finn. So that will be for me to do. I think it will not be a posted meeting, so we cannot deliberate. We'll have to, what I'll do is once we get that date set, I'll set a meeting date like very close thereafter where you can bring your own individual raw reactions to it, right? You don't need to go call another board or committee meeting at this point. Then if everyone's like, yeah, I need to explore this some more, right? We'll have the architect teed up with a proposal for that meeting so that we can approve kind of their scope and budget of what they're going to do. Let them go do the work. I'm just in a hypothetical example. Let them go do their work on a concept for Finn and give each committee a chance to react to it, as opposed to like, I think unless there's a showstopper when people tour it, we should let them do that work and then have the same reactionary process that we had to Woodward, because I mean, that certainly has informed where we've gone to date, right? Like, I think we all listen, right? And I think that's important. That would be the steps that I would propose. And then it probably wouldn't be ready for our board to review for a month plus by the time they actually did their work, et cetera. And in the meantime, as part of that work, they can be working through these new/expansion scenarios we also have floated throughout the meeting. And then, I don't know, so I'll pause there. Go ahead, Ryan.
Could we, just to take it like even a step back, because I think this would be helpful, because everybody here has their own board and committee, right? Sort of like parent group, right? Should
Well, not
they,
every, only 4. 4 out of the 7 do.
4 out of the 7, but for the library, COA, and for rec, should at least the concept of Finn be floated, right? Because this, I feel like it would help if we say Finn is a possibility, or do you want there to be more of a foundation for which
Well-
people, I mean, our meeting is public, right? So people already know it's going to be a scenario.
We're gonna have a
Right.
letter out there from the
Well-
Newry side.
I'm going to add it to the letter that we're sending out to everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So right there, I would just say, because I feel like there was very visceral reaction from COA. I hope it's okay to say that, Pam and Bill, just on Woodward and and you know, some of the concerns that you guys had about that facility. So it's just, I mean, like Finn seems like a better fit for a couple of the groups for a couple different reasons. So it's just, I mean, I don't think there would be the same level of maybe concern, but I don't know. I mean, I think it would be good for us to bring back to those boards. I'd at least like to tell the library trustees that this might be a potentiality. Does that make sense?
I mean, every board's welcome to do whatever they think is appropriate, right?
Okay.
And I'm sure, like, I know on Capital, for example, I can only speak to that. I have a standing update on Community Center, and I have a standing update on Neary every committee meeting. And it allows the committee a chance to weigh in, say, this is what I'd like to hear when the, you know, but most of the time they say I'm waiting for a formal report. The other mechanism I would propose there, Ryan, is I wouldn't call a special meeting for it, but like if you have a board meeting in between, just do exactly that. Say this is now on the table, but you can also take Janet's letter once it comes out and say, hey, board, I know you're really in tune to everything because there's a very involved group in general, but like just want to make sure you saw this and like highlight Finn on there and just say, let me know if you want to discuss, sort of thing.
One question I have, Jason, is the last architects, they just looked at Woodward from a spatial issue. I would suggest that maybe when these architects look at this building, they look at it not only from a space standpoint, but from an accessibility and appropriateness of the facility. In addition to, yeah, there's enough room, but it isn't worth anything to us type of.
Yeah. I think there's 2 ways to think about accessibility, Bill. Is remember, Woodward is a fully compliant ADA facility, right? They had a full ADA study done on it because it is, like, I think they had some nicks and nats they had to fix. Finn is an older facility, so there's like the true ADA guidelines, right? And then there's just the practical, right? We got caught up a lot in the practical, right? Which was rightfully so. So I think that's probably more what you're looking for. That I mean, obviously, if there's glaring ADA things, it's going to have to be fixed anyways because you're going to be tripping enough construction to renovate this thing anyways. But is that what I just want to make sure we're clear.
I used accessibility, but just from a general standpoint, the appropriateness of the building,
Yeah.
As how it's laid out. Is it laid out appropriate? But look at it more than just, is there enough room?
Yeah.
Is there enough square feet?
I can tell you there's no ramps, stairs, or anything in that building.
Don't get hung up on the accessibility. That's just one of the things they
Yeah.
should be looking at, but they should be looking at the appropriateness of the whole facility.
Yeah. So
Numerous standpoints.
here would be my plan, right? We tour Finn, we come back, have raw reactions. If individual people want to go back to their own boards and committees for updates in between, that's up to you. We then have the architect actually come. I want them to hear this from you, not from me, not from someone else, right? Like basically say, this is what we want you to accomplish. Is this included in your scope? And then we decide whether to move forward or not at that point. They give us their timeline, their chart, but they'll basically be making a pitch, but we don't have to go through the whole procurement process. So it's kind of like the best of both worlds. We make sure we're going to get what we want out of it and that your user groups want to hear. But at the same time, we don't have to wait the 30 days for it to sit out there and all of that other stuff.
And we need to present that to our board in that same scenario, that all of that is gonna happen. Just so they don't take it as face value and just say, no, we don't like this. So when we present it to our board, we're gonna have to present that whole picture to them, that these things are gonna happen. And then they will have, say at that point, after they have all of that information.
Great.
Just
And
so people don't-
we'll do the same thing we did last year, which was fun to run, but like, we'll have all the committees come, everyone can listen, hear each other, and that will likely tell us whether we're on a good path or not. But I think we'll have new construction in there as well. Just the numbers are gonna be large. We all know that, right? Let's just be honest.
Yeah. Just as far as the standalone facility options, Jason, we like as on the library side, we'd have to kind of, as part of the grant process, I feel like I keep saying as part of the grant process, so I'm already going to apologize because you're going to hear that a lot, but we'd have to do a planning and design ask at the next town meeting, and then we would have to go out to bid. I think we can definitely explore, though, under your existing contract, what the library would look like in a shared facility. So I think we can
Makes sense.
proceed with that. I don't know if the architect is going to extend their expertise to the idea of standalone facilities. I would just say we probably wouldn't want the library to be part of that. But again, I would have to kind of go back to with Janet to the full board and see. I mean, we'd have to in order to
Yeah.
do the grant, so.
And I think maybe what we do in that scenario, Ryan, is just given how nuanced your scenario is, it's probably an offline conversation when you're talking about your space, making sure it's still the right, just like every other department will have. You and Janet in that instance should have a specific conversation with them about, hey, we're going into the program. This is really what we need you to look at now. This is what we can hold off on for now. Okay. Does anyone have anything else they want to add to next steps?
I have a quick question about the letter that's going out. Has the Finn community been informed that the town is considering alternate uses for the school? Or would this letter be the first time they're seeing that? I'm just a little worried about people's reaction in terms of timing.
That will, really good comment. No, there has not been a direct letter, but that's what this NERI building committee letter is going to address. So I wonder, Janet, what do you think?
When is that going to go out?
I just have to write it.
Oh,
So I'm hopeful by early my goal is to have it done this week. I need not only Greg and Roger to review it at a bare minimum, given that I'm going to ask them to sign their names to it too. So my thought is it would go out very early next week, hopefully.
just let me know when that's going out. We'll
Time
schedule this for a day or two after.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's already out there. Like, it's already been discussed by NERI Building Committee. It's already been discussed in a capital meeting. It's now been discussed here. Everyone I've spoken to, like, there has not been that reaction. I am a Finn parent, so I can say that. But I do think
But we have no attendees here. I don't know how the other committee meetings are
Yeah,
going.
no, I mean, well, people watch the replays is kind of what have found how people have talked about it. But I think Nikki's point, like, all we need is one parent to be caught off guard, right? And let's face it, the current Finn parents will not be Finn parents by any time any of this, unless obviously there's future kids coming down the pike.
I don't,
Well, is
think
that-
that a week or two delay and hold on this.
I agree.
matters. Yeah.
Is
Right,
the letter
especially
you're sending
because-
out?
Sorry, just go
Sure.
ahead.
Go ahead, Nikki.
Oh, I was just going to say, especially because we haven't even seen Finn yet. So to send out the letter before we even get our first reactions to it I just think if we can wait a few weeks, it might be better.
I like it. Full disclosure, even if this committee doesn't like Finn for any sort of reuse, the NERI Building Committee is still going to have to study closing the school. Right? So then the future of that building could be, it won't be this committee's job, but just full disclosure, that's what the tone of the NERI letter is going to be about.
Will there
Okay.
be a time frame established, Jason? Because Nikki has a good point, I think, and a lot of people will obviously react, right, to the concept of it, but would, like, I think the thing you said is really informative about how this is going to be years from now, right, that it would happen. So will a time frame or like a timeline be established as part of that? Because I think that would go a long way.
We intend to message that this is a 5 to 7 year plan. And I think that's very consistent with what we talked about last year of when, right, COA was petitioning to add on to the senior center. We said, well, it's going to be 7 years before they get to use any new facility in any concept, right? Which is why we support adding on to the existing building now, short money for tremendous benefit. Like that was so it's the same timing, and it's unfortunately the state slows us down, but we can't ignore the 35 to 40% match.
Right.
Okay. Great point, Nikki. Thank you. We have no public comment here. So is there any other business that anyone wanted to talk about or conduct this evening? All right, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second,
Roll call vote. Susan,
Hi.
Jen,
Yes.
Janet,
Aye.
Tim F,
yes.
Bill,
Yes.
Nikki,
Yes.
and Jason is I. We are adjourned. I will be in touch on a tour date. Thank you.
Great.
Oh, and next
Thank
meeting,
you.